Walls can be useful at times. They can provide a safe enclosure for children and pets and protection from dangerous people and animals. But walls can be a sign of something else, an exclusivity born of privilege or fear. In Robert Frost's classic poem, Mending Wall, a man tells an apple farmer that the two of them must maintain a boundary between their orchards. With a stone firmly grasped in his hands, he declares, "Good fences make good neighbors." The apple farmer, a bit uneasy about the whole idea, responds, "Before I build a wall, I'll ask to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense." The farmer continues saying, "Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that wants it down. There's something in me also that dislikes a wall." My first experience of seeing a wall being put up happened just outside my window in East Jerusalem. In 2007, while directing a study tour in the Holy Land, Israel-Palestine, I stayed with the Cambodian missionary sisters who have a house of hospitality in Bethany, about 2 miles east of Jerusalem on the slopes of the Mount of Olives. It is also known as Al-Azaraya, Arabic for village of Lazarus, which is now marked by an infamous security wall constructed by Israel since 2002. This fortified barrier that stretches more than 400 miles, annexing Palestinian land inside the occupied West Bank. Depending on your perspective, the wall can mean different things. For Israelis, it has offered an understandable measure of security in a volatile region. Palestinians view it very differently. They refer to it as the separation wall, the apartheid wall, or simply the wall. As large slabs of gray concrete barriers 20 feet high were being erected outside my window, I heard women crying uncontrollably. The wall had cut across the sisters' property, separating them from their Palestinian neighbors and friends. Their cries of sadness reminded me of Rachel, who mourned the loss of her children. The wall has a sobering effect on anyone who comes near it. Palestinians who live inside the wall, the occupied territory, are isolated and feel imprisoned. Residents of Bethlehem, which is barely 3 miles away, need special permits and must deal with multiple checkpoints to enter Jerusalem. For Israelis, the wall offers protection against terrorism, which too often threaten daily life. A wall may be useful in some circumstances, but it is hardly an ideal as it impedes human interrelationships. Border fences and walls have been constructed throughout history to separate warring nations, protect trade routes, and deter migrants and refugees. At the end of World War II, there were less than 10 known border walls in the world. By the time the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, the number had grown to 15. Today, there are at least 77 such walls or fences around the world. Many were erected after terrorists attacked the U.S. on September 11, 2001. The Great Wall of China, built more than 2,000 years ago, is often considered the longest feat of human engineering. It is more than 13,000 miles long and took untold numbers of workers to build. The U.S.-Mexico border, the 10th longest in the world, extends 1,954 miles. While only a small portion of the border wall has been constructed, the U.S. administration in 2016-2020 planned to complete the border fence no matter the cost. There was even talks about installing floating border barriers to prevent migrants from trying to cross over the Rio Grande River that separates Mexico and the U.S. The Bible knows walls as well. The oldest protective wall known in human history was constructed at Jericho around 8000 BC. This wall, which was made of stones, was about 12 feet high and 6 feet wide. The destruction of this oldest wall in the world is recorded in the book of Joshua. Jericho is a famous biblical city located in the modern-day West Bank. Jesus passed through Jericho on his way to Jerusalem. Jericho was one of the earliest human settlements dating back to the 9th millennium BC. At around 1400 BC, Jericho was the first city that the Israelites encountered after they had crossed the Jordan River and entered the Promised Land. Up until this point, according to the Bible, the Israelites had spent 40 years wandering in the desert. Now they were face to face with the wall of Jericho that was tall and impregnable. Joshua writes, Jericho was shut up inside and out because of the Israelites. No one came out and no one went in. With the gates of the wall tightly shut, the Israelites were immobilized. God instructed Joshua to employ an unusual strategy to breach the wall and capture the city. Joshua and the Israelites followed God's instructions by marching around the city and carrying the Ark of the Covenant once a day for 6 straight days. On the 7th day, they marched around the wall of Jericho 7 times, blowing their trumpets and shouting in a loud voice, and the wall fell down. Only Rahab, a Canaanite woman who had sheltered some Israelite spies, and all those who belonged to her were spared. If the biblical story is accurate, then this event happened in the mid to late 13th century BC. Archaeological excavations at the Tel El Shaltan in Jericho have failed to substantiate the biblical version of the destruction of its walls and conquest of the city. Biblical archaeologists have demonstrated that there was a destruction that occurred around 1500 BC during an Egyptian military campaign. Evidence or lack thereof seems to indicate that Jericho had been deserted or unoccupied from the late 15th century until the early 10th century BC, the supposed time of Joshua's conquest. Apparently, the capture of Jericho, as told in the book of Joshua, was not meant to be taken literally. It had symbolic value. The wall could not block Israel from receiving the land God had promised them. How the Israelites came to settle in the Promised Land was a long and complex process that probably involved 3 types of events: military conquest, peaceful infiltration through migration, and peasant uprising. History teaches us that walls do not crumble easily. Protective walls, like those between Israel and the West Bank or the U.S. and Mexico, are usually thick and heavily reinforced. However, walls do collapse just like parts of the Great Wall of China and the Berlin Wall. Nothing lasts forever. Besides, In the age of airplanes and satellites, walls no longer serve defensive purposes like they used to. Statistics have shown that most illegal immigrants in the U.S. enter legally by way of airports on student, tourist, or work visas, and then stay past their visa's expiration date. It is estimated that visa overstays in the U.S. have outnumbered border crossings by a ratio of about 2 to 1. Jericho was certainly not the only city that had a wall. Most ancient cities were built on a strategic location and fortified with protective walls and gates. This was a necessary means of survival, especially in a time of war. Jerusalem, for example, was a city surrounded by walls since ancient times. Here's how a psalmist describes the holy city. I was glad when they said to me, "Let us go to the house of the Lord." Our feet are standing within your gates, O Jerusalem. Jerusalem built as a city that is bound firmly together. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May they prosper who love you. Peace be within your walls and security within your towers. Psalm 122. The word pontiff is derived from the Latin pontifex, which means bridge builder. True to his title as the pontiff of the Catholic Church, Pope Francis had made it clear that as Christians, we ought to build bridges, not walls. The issue is not about legitimate security measures, but about avoiding barriers to human interrelationships. In 2016, Pope Francis responded to the issue of migration and to politicians who propose building border fences, saying, "A person who thinks only of building walls, wherever they may be, and not building bridges is not Christian. This is not the gospel." The Pope's comment aboard his flight from Mexico to Rome sparkled controversy across the globe. Since that famous interview, the Pope has continued to speak out against governments that build walls to keep out migrants and refugees. He has appealed for a compassionate approach to migration. On March 31st, 2019, aboard another flight from Morocco to Rome, the Pope said, The builders of walls with blades that cut, with knives or with bricks, will become prisoners of the walls they make. History tells us that.